Dziękuję. Agus céim ar bháilte. Is mi sé drolín an bhfuil go má. How are you, friends? And good evening. I wanted to take some time out of my day and discuss Imbolc. There's a lot of information floating around out there that's not exactly that accurate. It's an important day. It's a special day. It's a sacred day. So what's it all about? What does the name mean? What do you do? Let's have a chat about that. A lot of people call it Candlemas, or the feast day of Saint Bridget. Well, let's start at the beginning. Some nice English Cavendish this evening. It's not really an English and it's not really a Cavendish, so I don't really know what they call it that, but it's quite good. It's quite good indeed. So Imbolc. Let's start with the etymologies of these words. Imbolc. It's has something to do with lactation, being pregnant or swollen. In the belly, in the womb. Okay? So when you hear me say Imbolc, automatically think in the belly or in the womb. Now, another word that's commonly used is Emelg. That's the one that's O-I-M-E-L-G or L-C, depends. It has something to do, loosely translated, with ewe's milk, the female sheep. So when the ewes begin and start their lactation cycle. There's an Old Irish word, I-O-M-F-H-O-L-C, Imbolc. Has to do with heavy rain. In verb form, it would be like folkim, which is like I wash or to wash, which can lead us to believe that this festival has something to do with purification and, possible lustrations happening. There's a Proto-Celtic word, and this is, follow me on this, but this is conjecture. It's definitely speculative at best. And I'm going to butcher this word. It's Proto-Celtic. Embiblogon, E-M-B-I-B-O-L-G-O-N, Embiblogon. Has to do with budding, when things begin to bud. Now, how far can we trace this festival back? It's a good question. It depends on who you ask. If you're going to ask somebody in, academia, they're going to have very hard dates. They're going to say, this is what we have on paper, this is what we can trace it to, and anything before this date, there's no mention of it, so we don't talk about that. Most of those people often happen to be Catholic as well. So for them, this is about the feast day of Saint Bridget. It's not really about Imbolc so much. But how far can we trace this back to? Well, this is a strange one. If we know anything about the Neolithic culture, we know that they were highly obsessed with tracking the movements of, the sun and the moon and the stars. So lots of the sites had alignments. We know places like Stonehenge and Newgrange, Burnavoyne, have alignments with winter solstice and summer solstice, what have you. But in Ireland, at the Hill of Tara, the Mound of Hostages, the inner chamber is aligned to the rising sun on both Samhain and Imbolc. Let that sink in just for a second. The Neolithic culture has an alignment with Samhain and Imbolc. Strange, no? But why Samhain and Imbolc? Both of them. Well, if we know anything about the Neolithic culture, we know that agriculture was new. It was very important to them. But Samhain and Imbolc. What happens at Samhain and again at Imbolc? The sheep. Sheep are impregnated around Samhain, and then they are born at Imbolc. Their birth. Things are being born in the spring. So it's a burial mound. It is a womb of the earth. It is in the belly of the earth. So if sheep are impregnated around Samhain, and then they're born around Imbolc, the fertility rites would be Bealtaine for people. Bealtaine. All the way to Imbolc for when women are giving birth. Lactation, cycles in tune, overlapping, in sync with nature. You have birth, you have nature, you have like the buds returning, you have blossoms like the snowdrops coming up, and the birds returning. Light is growing again, and just like the ewes are producing milk and lactation, the rains begin, and earth brings growth and birth. So focusing here a little bit on milk. Sheep's milk has a higher fat content than that of cattle. And this is important. And I'm going to try to cover this in reading an excerpt from a book. Bear with me. Thus the farmers were anxious to resume milking as soon as possible in the year on account of their dwindling store, would naturally choose the sheep for early breeding rather than the cow. The dangers of early calving were known in the Highland Scotland. If cows calf before the first week of March, it will be sometimes a month or 6 weeks before they have milk sufficient to feed the calves. Old Irish tradition suggests that early calving in February was also avoided then, for the most mature calves of the spring were called Dartade Inicha, I'm not sure, a Shrovetide male calf, born in late February, early March. A similar pattern appears to be present in Crete, where milking of ewes runs from January to July, after which the flock was washed, sheared, weaned, and allowed to run with the rams. Shearing and washing break the bond between dam and lamb and bring about weaning. This in turn causes ovulation soon after the summer solstice, since ovulation in the sheep is triggered by the lengthening of nighttime after midsummer. Given a gestation period of 5 months, the first lambs would drop in late January or early February. The importance of the return of fresh milk at this time can hardly be exaggerated. For one thing, ewe's milk was greatly enjoyed, one of delectables mentioned in the vision of McHolney's in his fare of white porridge made with sheep's milk. It is also higher in fat content than cow's milk, and all the more valuable, therefore, in the context of the cold weather and typical food storage in early February. According to Petty, Cow's milk had long since petered out. The Irish viewed the annual milking cycle as 90 days of full milk in May, June and July 3 gallons, 90 days of 1/3 of that 1 gallon, and 90 days of about 1 quart daily, and 90 days of no milk starting in January. Stored foods had been largely consumed during the preceding period of guesting and feasting. On this socially induced hunger, Finns Morrison, in the 16th century English observer, wrote, "The wild Irish in time of greatest peace impute covetousness and base birth to him that hath any corn after Christmas, as it were a point of nobility to consume all within those festival days." The onset of hungry spring is depicted in an old Irish story that describes how a woman saved her father, Goliad, from dishonoring his lord, who had come a feasting in the dead of winter, and then there's a story about that. So we can see clearly that things were timed. This time period gives us this much milk from the cow. This time period, less milk, and then less milk, and then less milk. So, for the sheep to crop on grass that's lower than the cow, they can survive on meager vegetation in late winter. Late winter is our early spring. So we have ewes giving lactation and then giving birth to spring lambs. At the same time, we have many women giving birth and having lactation at the same time. This coincides because the higher fat content of the milk got them through a harder time in nature. But don't forget, it's not just about milk. Excuse me. It's about butter. It's about cheese. The Neolithic people, that culture, those great monument builders, they made cheese and had butter. There's even pottery, that shows traces of cheese making in their stoneware. Imbolc was also a time of when spring raiding began, when the men started being proactive and preparing and planning for their first raids. And one thing I should mention, though, that I see a lot of people, this is a contention of mine, a lot of people saying Imbolc is the beginning of spring. It's the first day of spring, is when spring begins. No. Think of spring like I mentioned, in the belly, in the womb. Winter is pregnant with spring. Winter is pregnant with spring. Didn't give birth to spring yet. It is swollen. It is full. It is about to happen. The snowdrops, when they come up, represent hope. Spring is coming soon. Light is growing. Hold on for a little longer. Spring will be here soon. It's a threshold period. And it's not just one day. Imbolc was not just beginning of February and then it's over. It was a period of time. Just like the time it takes to come down the birth canal. There's labor involved. There's labor involved. There's work to be done. So, the ultimate question. Goddess or saint? You know, you have the three sisters mentioned. the goddess of poetry, smithcraft, and healing. And then the saint. Gee, which one came first? But her name. Anglicized would be Bridget. But we have Brid, Brige, Brija, Brigandu, the Brigantes, the tribe. And just like anything, a lot is told through the etymology of the name. Power, force, might, strength, vigor, authority. Some even say exalted. Invigorating essence is the one that I like the best. But fame, value. She who raises herself upon high. So it also has to do with the heights of a hill. Now, a lot can be said within this book. I'll post a link to a blog post that I wrote all about Imbolc. It's short, it's sweet, but it's chock full of information as well. I suggest you read that and then pick up Morgan's book. Now, Bridge's connection to Imbolc. I don't think there's enough length in a video for that. You definitely have to see for yourself her connection with her name applied to her stories. It's in the lore. Now, a lot can be found on Google. You can search it, but in Morgan's book, it talks about that more in depth. So please support her. She's an amazing author. Her work's well researched, and the references are clear. And it's a very easy read. So her connection to Imbolc, I would say, not just with the stories, but also with the folk customs and the traditions that have survived, and in noting those things about the alignment to Imbolc and Samhain at the Mount of Hostages. Those people in the Neolithic period were aligning things to festivals that weren't even really developed or probably even considered until the Iron Age. So we have St. Bridget's Feast Day. What's that all about? Well, if we look at the Wheel of the Year, and then we see that here in early February we have Imbolc, and there was this culture that existed that had these festivals and these traditions that happened around then. It's not hard to see that the church easily just plugged in to that. You look at, all throughout Europe, you have solstices being very important, and then you have the Holy Saints John being on their feast days, being on the solstices. There was a culture that existed, and they had these festivals on these solstices, so they're going to stick these saint days, these feast days, on the pre-existing culture's calendar. So what does the church do when they can't convert pagans? They just plug in. Was St. Bridget even real? That's a question. Did the church make her up? Maybe they couldn't take certain things away from the culture. It was too tightly woven into their consciousness. It was too a part of their daily lives, of their year, their seasons, their cycles. That the church couldn't get rid of it all, so they had to adapt. They had to get bums into the seats. Now, if you look into the life of Saint Bridget, you'll clearly see that through her stories to the things that she was about, she's a copy, albeit a Christian copy, but she's a copy of a goddess that existed long before her. And they happen to have the same name in a way. I would urge you guys, and now I can't cover all of these in one video, but I would urge you guys, if you're really interested in Imbolc, to look into the surviving folk customs and the traditions of Imbolc. And then ask yourself, are they Christian? When you're reading these folk customs and these traditions, are these customs Christian traditions? So, one of the things people do is have a Bridget's cross. A Bridget's cross. St. Bridget's cross. They come in many different designs. The crosses are definitely not Christian crosses, and some of them are based off of triad, and many of them are very swastika-like. If you know anything about the symbol of the swastika, it's very old. We have references, even the Hallstatt culture was using them in the early Iron Age. It's a solar wheel. It wasn't until the Nazis perverted it and used it for their own agenda, but yes, the solar wheel. A light is returning. Now, if you ask, when do these customs originate? Where do they originate? You're going to get those people that are hardcore academics, and they're going to say, well, the earliest reference we have to Bridget's cross is the 17th century. And anything before then, well, there's no record of that, so it started then. That's not how it works. That's never how it works. Just because something is mentioned or recorded doesn't mean that's when it started. But there's no reference of it, so to them, that's how they see it. People could have been making similar ones, the same ones, hundreds and hundreds of years prior. And don't forget, even in the 9th century, the role of the druid, still had political influence in Munster. They had different laws there than they did in Connacht or in Ulster. It wasn't just conversion and it was over. And this book talks about that in depth. If you want to know more about medieval Ireland, that book is spot on and will give you a real taste of what the culture was like away from all the trappings of paganism. So some of these customs, I can't really get into all of them. There's so many, it's not funny. Brija, the goddess, was very important. I would say and suggest that she was so important, the church couldn't get rid of her. So ask yourself, with these following customs, these folk customs, how Christian are they? these folk customs that people do to this day on St. Bridget's feast day. One of them is inviting Bridget into the house. There's different prayers and poems that they say about inviting her in, opening the door and what have you. There's the crossog, or crossbryd, which is making a Bridget's cross. There's the brotbryd, which is the cloak or the mantle of Bridget. Now, you'll hear me pronounce it differently. I swap between the Old Irish pronunciation, modern pronunciation, and Scottish Gaelic Bríde. But the cloak or the mantle was used as a means of healing. You would set it outside on the night of the feast night, or of Imbolc, hoping that Bríde would pass by and bless it, and then you brought it in. And some traditions say that it's not fully charged or made to be whole until you do this tradition for 7 years. And, you know, it's for curing the headache, or if you have a fever, or if somebody's sick, you use this, you put this on the person. Now, today, a lot of people use like a small handkerchief, or some ribbon, or a small cloth. But originally, it was a cloak, a brot, or a blanket, or a mantle, something that you wrapped around you. And we've done ours in my family for, this is the 9th year? Yeah, this is the 9th year. Let me grab it real quick. Now, some cultures, some towns, some families, they use like all white. Some people use red. Ours is a nice big wool lap blanket that was made in Ireland. So that's what we use. And you know, if you're sick, you just wrap it around you and keep warm and pray to Bríde. Some of these other traditions, a young girl, a maiden, would leave the house to gather the rushes to make the crosses. And as she harvested them, she would, sing or pray. And then she would come to the threshold of the door. And she would say something like, "Be on your knees and open your eyes and let the blessed Bríde in." And then the whole family would respond, "Oh, Bríde, come in, and you are 100 times welcome." And then, she would walk in. She might leave them at the hearth. The hearth is the very important region that is associated with Bríde. The smoring of the fire, the coals, for the next morning. And then, the same girl who harvested the rushes, she might be the one to bless the food. And then after the meal, all the crosses are made. Go, let's go. Some traditions used a corn doll. A little corn dolly. Dressed up. Sometimes a wand was put into the bed with her. A little cradle, a little bed. Other traditions were, what do they call it? The girdle. The Krishbrija. The belt. It was like a long hoop. and they had 4 crosses, 4 of the Brigid's crosses on the hoop, a big hoop, and you would step through the hoop. There was a certain way that they did this. And it was generally the men that carried the hoop. And they would say something like, "My girdle is Brigid's girdle, the girdle with 4 crosses. Rise up, women of the house, and go out 3 times. May whoever goes through my girdle be 7 times better a year from today." In this tradition, men would step through the hoop sideways on their right foot, where females would put the hoop down over them, over their heads, and then stepping through the hoop with their right foot. They did this 3 times. It was symbolic of like giving birth. It was a passageway. There's divinations that were made as some of these customs. Just like here in America, we have Groundhog's Day. There was lore that dealt with the hedgehog, and in Scotland they dealt with the snake, the adder, the serpent. And you'd have something like, "Umbrige's mon, the serpent, will come out of the hole. I will not harm the serpent, nor the serpent will harm me." So these are some of the customs that you see, and there's many, many more. Now, do any of those customs sound like they're related to Catholicism or Christianity? They do not. Yet, these customs are still associated and practiced on the feast day of Saint Bridget. And it drives me batty that so many things from the old culture are woven into Christianity, and that the Christians can't see for the life of them that such practices of, okay, here's this holy well, it's dedicated to Brige, and we're going to go there barefoot, or we're going to walk around it, Jesha, 9 times, say these prayers or sing the songs or have these chants. Yet, you have people show up barefoot, walk around it 9 times Jesha, and say the rosary in Nwelanga. And they think that's that's their form of Christianity. They couldn't get rid of the previous culture. So here in my location of the world, as I look outside and pay attention, the ewes are not lactating, the snowdrops are not up, and agriculturally, these things don't happen in this region a lot closer to the spring equinox. Now, where I lived before, in the other part of the state, they did. Snowdrops are up in early February. And the ewes were lactating. So, knowing what we know about the etymology of the name of the festival, some of these folk customs, what Brigida's name means, all that's left to do is for you guys to read her stories. Read the lore. And I encourage you as well, because it's this time of year, know what's happening for the feast day of St. Bridget. And then when you read the old stories, the old lore of the goddess, and then you read the stuff about St. Bridget, you'll clearly see the crossover stuff. And you'll say, this existed first, these folk customs are still being practiced, and they are definitely not Christian. There's a beauty in being able to see these things clearly. But the real magic exists when you celebrate these things, when you pay homage to these things, when you invite her into your home, when your people have a brought to use, and you can give it to your little ones when they're sick. So on that, that's really all I have to say about Imbolc. Wishing you guys well. Hope you have a good season. I'll try to talk to you in about a week or so. Things are better. Things are getting better. There's hope. There's hope for spring. Slangafol. Iwa. Agus. Gutugdir. Honor. Dunajeha. May the gods be honored.